Schwertgeflüster, der HEMA-Podcast mit Alexander Fürgut und Michael Sprenger. Liebe Hörerinnen, liebe Hörer, die heutige Folge ist ein bisschen speziell, denn wir haben ein Interview gemacht mit dem wunderbaren Guy Windsor. Und da es super krass viel Aufwand gewesen wäre, das jetzt nochmal eine Folge so zu machen, wie wir es mit Martin Fabian gemacht haben, wo wir dann das Interview auseinandergenommen haben und dann so Snippets gemacht haben und dann nochmal einen Podcast drüber auf Deutsch gemacht haben. Deshalb kriegt ihr das jetzt eiskalt auf Englisch. Das ist die erste offizielle Podcast-Folge, die nur auf Englisch ist. Und wir hoffen, dass es trotzdem für euch passt. Gebt uns mal gerne Feedback dazu. Und jetzt habt einfach mal richtig viel Spaß mit den nächsten, wir haben übelst lange geredet, also 2 Stunden sind es, glaube ich. Das ist auch die längste Podcast-Folge, also ganz viele Neuerungen hier. Guy Windsor und Schwertgeflüster, The Sword Guy und Schwertgeflüster sozusagen. Es ist kein reiner Schwertgeflüster-Podcast, es wird auf beiden Plattformen ausgespielt, also auf Guys und auf unserer. Und ist quasi mehr so ein nettes Gespräch dreier Podcaster. Kein klassisches Interview. Also viel Spaß jetzt damit und gebt uns gerne Feedback, wie es euch gefallen hat.
So, first up, nice to meet you, Guy. I've read a lot about you, mostly from you.
Okay.
So, I've read a couple of your books. I've read your blog for, I think, a couple of years, actually. Okay. So it feels like I know you a little bit, but actually I'm meeting you, even if it's virtually for the first time.
Yeah, it's a problem you have with anyone who writes stuff. Is I have the same experience when I meet an author whose novels I've read, where you think you know them, and actually it turns out you're just really familiar with their work.
Yeah, and I think it gets worse if you have a podcast, which we both do.
Absolutely, yes, but it's nice actually because it creates because like for example, when I go to a sword event, people who've listened to the podcast but haven't actually met me feel more comfortable coming up and saying, well, Guy, actually, this Fiore thing and how does Posta di Donna work and blah, 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 right? Which is exactly what I'm there for.
Yeah.
I'm there for the students, but them having listened to my voice many times makes them just more comfortable in coming up and actually asking me the question.
You think so? Don't you think they get a little bit, I don't know, starstruck or something?
Honestly, that's worse with books.
Really?
Because there's this natural misunderstanding that pretty much everyone who reads books has, including myself, that author equals authority.
Yeah.
So when somebody has written a book and you have bought that book and you read it, you interact with the author through that sort of separation of the book. And, they're the sort of person who can actually produce a book and have it published and whatnot. And so that makes them sort of up here, and it's like they're some kind of separate being. There's a story of when Roald Dahl met the Captain Hornblower author, whose name I'm suddenly blanking on for no good reason. And he describes the experience of meeting him as, he expected him to be wearing some sort of robe and have sparks flying out of his head. But it was just this perfectly ordinary bloke who showed up and asked him about his war experiences.
Yeah.
C.S. Forrester, that's the author. But with a podcast, if you come across on the show as this distant authority figure telling people how it is, then maybe. But most of the time I'm interacting with peers, and they'll correct me live, and they will interact with me in a kind of natural way if it's a good interview. And that kind of, I think it softens the whole,
it grounds
this well-known sword person, and actually he sounds like an ordinary person.
Yeah, it kind of grounds the people a bit.
Right.
If you hear them talk in a casual way.
Yeah, voice is different.
Yeah. So I wrote you because we both do sword podcast. Our podcast Schwertgeflüster is in German. Yours, the Sword Guy, in English. So I'd like to start at the beginning. What made you start the podcast? Why did you do it? And why do you keep doing it?
Okay, those are 2 separate questions.
Yeah, indeed they are.
And I'll reflect the questions back at you when I'm done answering it. Okay, because turnabout is fair play. Okay, in November 2019, I read a book called Invisible Women by Caroline Criado Perez.
Oh yeah, very interesting book.
It's a fascinating book. She's a data scientist. And in the book, she describes all sorts of ways in which, because the default assumption is that person equals male person, women are discriminated against in all sorts of appalling ways. One obvious one being how cars are tested for safety using a default male crash test dummy. And when you test those same cars, they get a 5-star rating with the default male crash test dummy. You test them again with a female-shaped dummy, they might only get a 3-star rating. So women are driving around in cars that they've been sold as safe for them, when actually they're not, because they haven't been tested on women or women-shaped dummies. So it was horrifying, right? And it sort of opened my eyes to aspects of sort of historical martial arts community that are default male, like gloves, right? My female students have always had a hell of a time getting gauntlets that fit them.
Yeah.
And all sorts of other things, right? So that was sort of tinkering away in the back of my head. And then during lockdown, in sort of, I guess, March, April, May, there was the whole Black Lives Matter thing erupted. And that was like, fuck. I mean, there's in all sorts of ways, this is related to the Invisible Women book. It's the same, fundamentally, it's the same phenomenon, right? I thought, well, what can I do about it? Right? And honestly, nothing, right? I'm not a politician. I'm not immensely wealthy. I'm not wealthy at all. And so I was like, and just one day I was just doing woodwork in my shed, and I thought, well, why don't I start a podcast? And this was unrelated to all this social justice stuff. And I thought, well, why would I start a podcast? I mean, Jesus, it's a lot of work. And they don't make any money, right? I'm guessing you're not driving around in Ferraris thanks to your Schwertke.
Not yet.
No. I mean, it's it's kind of like getting a dog, right?
Yeah.
It's just not just a one-time thing. You have to keep doing it on a regular basis.
Right. So I thought, hang on, because of the work I've done in historical martial arts, I have a certain visibility, right?
Yeah.
And if I start a podcast, I can invite people onto the show and thus share my platform with them, share my visibility with them, right? So actually there's something within my own little community of historical martial arts people, there is something I can do to improve the way that women and minorities of various kinds are, at least get heard from, right?
Okay,
the issue with, go ahead.
Yeah, so actually the point is to amplify the voices of those that are not as likely to be heard, right? Did I get you correctly?
Exactly. Yeah. So, like, again, another story from Perez's book. There was this disaster, this horrible tsunami that destroyed a whole bunch of housing and killed thousands of people in India many years ago. And when they rebuilt all of this housing, and there were no women involved in the planning process, and they built thousands of apartments that had no kitchens, right?
Yeah.
Just because nobody asked the women, right? And in that culture, kitchens were very much the female domain, so the men didn't even think about them. And literally, they physically built these apartments with no kitchens in, right? It's just insane. So I thought, well, okay, but then I don't want my podcast to be just women and minorities and everything else, because if I do that, it becomes a very niche thing, and it's not likely to get people who are not from those demographics listening to it. So I'll also invite people like Roland Varchika, Christian Tobler, and so on. Basically, middle-aged straight white dudes who are well known in the community, right? Because then middle-aged straight white dudes might listen to the show and then go, oh, that was quite interesting, and listen to the next one, which happens to be a woman, for instance, right? And so I'm running the show effectively as a social justice project. That's what it's for.
It's interesting that this was the original thought behind it, or the impulse to create it, because when you scroll through the episodes, you get that vibe. Like if someone asked me, then I would have said, yeah, that's seems to be important for a guy when he's selecting the guests.
Right.
But the way you explain it, it's one step further. It's not just, this is a happy coincidence. Yeah, you can do it. But no, this is the reason that you started it.
This is, like the single, probably most difficult thing about running the show is finding enough women.
Related to the same,
right?
Sure.
Because I can tell you, so many men have contacted me, telling me how wonderfully qualified they are to be on the show. Not a single woman has ever pitched me.
Really?
Right. So I go out and I find many of these are women who've shown up to my seminars, women who I know through other sword-related things or whatever. Sometimes it's just like one thing I really use social media for is kind of skulking around the internet looking for interesting women and people who are not middle-aged straight white men to invite onto my show.
Yeah.
I recently had Dr. Ashley Polisek on, who is a Sherlock Holmes expert, but also teaches Bolognese swordsmanship. So there's always at least a plausible sword connection. And usually there's a plausible sword connection. But sometimes it's just, an interesting person. Like, okay, if you contact some random person, especially if you're a bloke contacting a woman through the internet and they don't know you, right? Like, it would be super weird to say, hi, I think you're interesting. Could we just chat for an hour? That would be great.
Well, everything changes if you do it public.
Weirdo. Right. That's creepy stalker weirdo. But like, hello, I'm interested in your work. I have a podcast. Would you like to come on the show? Totally different conversation. So it's this fantastic pretext to talk to interesting people.
I see. Yeah. I mean, it's we had the same issue.
Yes, same for us.
It was not exactly that we wanted to give a, like, this was not the main reason we started a podcast, but we also wanted to interview women that are important in the community, that do stuff. And so far, I think we interviewed like 4, and it's hard because even if you ask them,
do they have to be able to speak German?
Yes,
yeah.
That's the main issue for us. I wanted to add because, the women in historical European martial arts are minority, and German-speaking women, there are much less.
Right. Yeah, it's easier when you're doing it in English. But there's all sorts of interesting academics who have produced books in German about, medieval culture and medieval warfare, medieval sword stuff. I know because I've asked a few. And at least a couple of them, one of the reasons they didn't really want to come on the podcast is because their spoken English, they didn't feel confident in their spoken English. So
I would be very much interested to hear it maybe after the show, who you contacted, who would be possibly available in German, because we also want to have academics on the show, and it's not easy to get them. Like the HEMA crowd knows the podcast, and if you ask them like, hey, do you want to come on the show? And they're like, oh yeah, that sounds good, I'm coming. And the academics are like, well, I don't know, podcast, maybe not.
Yeah. It really helps if the host has a PhD, which doesn't help you guys at all.
No.
But it certainly helps me contact, because I have several times I go to the university that they work for, find their department, contact the secretary of the department and say, look, I run this show, I'd be interested in interviewing so-and-so about their published work, so-and-so. Would you please forward my request? And then in my signature, it's clear that, I'm sufficiently academic to have got a PhD, right? And that basically makes the secretary of the department feel comfortable forwarding my email.
Okay.
That's not why I got a PhD, but it's just one of those unexpected benefits.
Yeah.
Herr Doktor, as you Germans say.
That would be an additional reason for people to make a PhD, like getting guests for a podcast.
Totally. And it does seem to help because it just establishes your, I guess, seriousness in the academic field.
True.
Michael, don't you have?
They're going to be.
Yes. I just don't have to write in my signature that it's a PhD in electrical engineering.
No, you don't. You have a PhD.
I just write Dr. Michael Sprenger, and that's it.
Whenever you contact any university for any reason, throw in a PhD. You don't have to say that. You don't have to read out the title of your dissertation. It doesn't matter, right? It really doesn't. It just means that you are like you belong in the academic sphere.
Yeah.
Right. It's just a. It's like putting on a tuxedo to go to the office. It just makes you look like you belong.
You're not academic rubbish.
Honestly, I have met many people with PhDs who are academic rubbish, and many people without who are academically way better than I am. Right? I mean, I've interviewed Dirk Hagedorn on my show. You must have had him on yourself.
Yeah.
Right? And that dude has done vastly more academic work than I ever have in historical martial arts. And he has enough there for 4 PhDs, and he hasn't got it's ridiculous. Right? I mean, if I had the power to like bestow doctorates on worthy people, Dirk was one of the very first people like that. So yeah, it's like the whole, like, any fool can write a book, many fools do, but as we were saying earlier, it's easy to confuse an author with an authority. So, and it's, look, so if you spend any time in academia, plenty of idiots get PhDs.
Yeah, I mean, so the tip to use the PhD when contacting academics is already a pretty good tip. So
yeah,
good that we get together and exchange.
Right, Herr Dr. Michael, there we go.
Yeah. And next time I will actually try it.
Yeah, it just basically, you just want to make people feel comfortable. Like one of the things, I don't know if you guys do this, but when I invite someone on the show for an interview, I tell them I will send them questions in advance. They can add questions that they want, stuff they want to talk about, or decline any question. I mean, I don't know if you listen to my show that often, but I have some standard questions that I ask everyone, and some of my guests don't get asked that question, and that's because they've just decided they don't want to be asked that question, and I just don't ask it to them. That's fine. And then I always send them the recording in advance so they can check it to make sure that it's, they're comfortable with it before it goes live. And maybe 1 in 5, 1 in 10, something like that, ask for something to be changed. But again, it's all about just making them feel comfortable coming on the show and then talking about anything, because they know they can cut it out afterwards, so they don't have to worry about saying something extremely rude about some historical martial arts person or their boss or whatever else, because they can just cut it out later.
Yeah, we typically don't send questions in advance because we always tell people it's not an interview, like we're doing some talking, like it's just a nice dialogue.
As we do now. Yep.
Right.
Yeah.
So why did you guys start your show?
Ooh, the why is actually a very good question. It was in the beginning of 2020.
Right.
More than 2 years now.
Yeah, so your show's a bit older than mine.
And it was pre-corona, so no one was talking really seriously about the corona issue. And I remember myself,
like we started right before it.
Yeah, I remember myself scrolling through Spotify podcasts and searching for some HEMA and fencing related stuff. And I couldn't really find something that way. And I thought, yeah, man, why not? Why isn't there a HEMA podcast or a German speaking historisches Fechten podcast? And somehow the first person who came to my mind was Alex. And I wrote him a message. What do you think about starting a HEMA podcast? And Alex answer, maybe he could give Alex, you can answer yourself what you said that time.
Well, basically at the point you wrote me, I was already thinking about starting a podcast for like a month or so. Yeah. Because I was at so many HEMA events and I had watched so many HEMA talks and read books, and it's often, if it's not academic work, it's not reproduced. Sometimes it's filmed, which is good, but there's so much knowledge out there that could be easily shared, but no one did it. And it kind of annoyed me and it nagged me that this was circulating inside the scene, but no one who knew who told who something. Like there's some implicit knowledge, but the new guy has no chance to learn this. He has to stick in the scene for 10 years and maybe he had enough conversations to learn the stuff himself. But this is not skill, this is knowledge, and it's easy to transfer it, like with a podcast. And I thought this was what was missing from the German HEMA scene, because there's a lot of knowledgeable people, for example, the Hagedorn, and why not have them on and let them talk about what they knew? And you get a crash course in something in like an hour or hour and a half.
And then,
so it was an easy answer as Stark, yes.
Yes, and it was fitting perfectly, because Alex said to me that, yes, but I don't want to do that audio mixing and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's a pain in the ass.
And I said, well, I like to do it.
Well, you can do mine then. Brilliant. Excellent. Okay.
That's something which I had in my studies.
Yep.
As in electrical engineering, there was also like a lot of signal works, stuff like that.
Wow, that's super lucky.
Yeah,
because I knew absolutely nothing. Right, one of my early episodes, I think it was one with Kaya Sadowski. It went out with Kaya was like super quiet and I was quite loud, and it was just impossible to listen to. And some people like contacted me with helpful suggestions as to what I could do, and then I was like, oh shit, if I'm actually going to do this, I have to do this perhaps to a better standard. And so one of the guys on my mailing list is an audio engineer, and I hired him to basically teach me. So we had a Zoom call and we opened up Audacity, and he taught me what I need to do to bring my audio engineering skills up to the basic minimum standard to produce listenable podcasts. Right. And I'm still at that basic minimum standard of producing listenable podcasts.
I think the first couple of episodes have to be horrible, especially when it comes to audio quality, or else you're starting too late. Like, you need to get a feel for it if this is actually your thing, and then learn the skill.
Actually, our first episodes, they were horrible too, because I was experimenting with the tools that Audacity provides. Right. And so I didn't find the ones I use now in the first like 5, 6, 7 episodes. Right. But from then it was much better.
Yeah,
and
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, just wanted to explain the next part from how Schwertgeflüster started, because Alex said, but we have to do it professionally, not like not only putting this on YouTube, stuff like that, but making a real website and putting it on Spotify, Apple, stuff like that. And I thought, okay, can you do it? And he said, yes, that's something I can do. And so Alex makes the website and the upload and stuff like that. And that's how we interact quite well.
Yeah, I got about maybe 20 episodes in, and I was like, okay, I want to keep this going, but I just don't have the mental bandwidth to do it on my own. And so I put a call out on my email list, and actually one of my friends who lives like 6 blocks that way said, yes, I could do that. And so she does transcriptions, does the uploads, the show notes, she writes the show notes, she does all of that stuff, gets everything uploaded to all the various places. And obviously I pay her because, this is paid work, but yeah, I couldn't sustain it on my own because I just don't have the energy for it. Because it is, I don't generally do sort of long-term projects like a book. If a book takes a really long time, it might take me 4 years to write, and then it's done and it's out and it's done and I can forget about it. Kids, they're a much longer project, but that's a bit different. you have biological wiring that helps with that. But yeah, in my sort of day-to-day, none of my projects require a kind of weekly commitment. And
that's so funny coming from an author. Like,
right. Well, but it's true. Like, it matters that I produce books fairly regularly.
Yeah.
But it doesn't matter if I do any work on a particular book in a particular month.
Yeah. Okay. I can see that.
So very often, a book that takes 2 years to write, probably there's a month of tinkering around with it, 3 months of forgetting about it altogether, another week of tinkering around with it, 3 months, 6 months maybe of not even thinking about it or just thinking about it off and on. And then 2 months of intense sort of, okay, now it's ready. Boom.
Yeah.
And that's when most of it gets written. Then forget about it for a month, let it sit. Then maybe spend a week editing it, then send it off to the editor. And then it's in the kind of production process, which is like the straightforward bit where you send it off to various professionals for layout and get cover design done and do all the publishing side of things, which doesn't require much creative thought. But the book itself, it's not this much every day, this much every week, this much every month at all. It's intense bursts followed by periods where I'm thinking about something else altogether.
It's interesting that you do it like that,
because
the
podcast, it has to be. So the podcast has to be every bloody week because these things have to be regular, right? So I don't do it that way. I don't do it that way at all. I do I usually have maybe 8 or 10 episodes in the bag. Like the way when I started, I was like, okay, I will not launch the first episode until I have 6 recorded and ready to go.
Yeah, that's a
because if I have 6 recorded and ready to go, I can take 6 weeks off and still get the next one out if I need to. And in the end, it went so easy at the beginning. I had 10 in the bag before I launched the first one. And, twice now, I've got down to having maybe 2 in the bag. And then I think, do I want to continue the podcast or not? And I, so far, twice have said, yes, I do. And then I've scurried about finding people and interviewing them and making the episodes and stuff. And, right now I've got, I think, I had a period like that just a few weeks ago. And I was like, am I going to keep this going? And since then, I've done 5 recorded interviews and I've got another 4 scheduled. So yes, it's definitely keeping going.
So you're questioning it because it's too stressful if you only have 2 episodes. Did I get that right?
No, I question everything every now and then.
Okay.
So like every project, I'm like, do I really want to do this? Do I really want to do this? So like with the podcast, I scheduled a bunch of stuff to kind of get me through over the summer because I was going away with the family for holidays and doing other things. I wasn't going to have any time for doing anything. So everything was scheduled in July. So I didn't do anything with the podcast at all in August. And then I was like, right, do I want to keep this going? And I thought, actually, yes, I do. And so I contacted a bunch of people and arranged interviews and, so it actually got to the point where there was the episode that had been scheduled, ready to go out, and I had 1 further episode recorded. That's how close to the wire it got. And I was like, no, I'm going to do it. Because, at the end of the day, I'm like 124 episodes or something, right? It's a lot, right?
Yeah, so on a weekly schedule, right?
Yeah. And by itself, it is a large and valuable body of work, which if I decide to stop, that's still a useful service to the community that people will hopefully find and continue listening to and getting value from for years to come, right? And more than half of the guests are women, and we have, people from all sorts of demographics and stuff as well. So we have like this broad spectrum picture of the historical martial arts community there, right? So stopping would be okay.
Yeah.
But it doesn't quite feel like we've got there yet. So I'm just going to keep going for another round. And then, I don't know, maybe in 3 months or 6 months, whatever, I'll go, do I really want to do this? And the answer will be no.
So,
who knows?
So we started out with doing weekly episodes. And we are usually just 1 or 2 episodes ahead. But it was too hard, and we switched to every 2 weeks. But still, we do around a third of our episodes with a guest, and 2/3 are me and Michael talking, because scheduling with
that's
guests
a lot easier to schedule.
Yeah.
That's a lot easier to schedule.
How are you doing it? Because that's a lot of work. I mean, you need to synchronize calendars, give them some information beforehand,
okay.
how did they prepare, and so on.
Very important thing to remember. I don't have a day job. This is part of my day job. Right? Yeah. So, I make my living from teaching historical martial arts one way or the other. And the podcast makes no money. I have some lovely Patreon supporters who are super kind and lovely and send me money every month to help with the podcast expenses. And that covers maybe half of the expenses, right? The actual money that goes out, because remember, I'm paying an assistant to do all the admin stuff. And then there's hosting and all the other stuff that goes with it, right? So it doesn't make money. But fortunately, my books and my courses tend to make enough money that I don't have to worry about this particular project being by itself, financially worthwhile, right? So it is just, I think the historical martial arts community needs this, because it is still far too many middle-aged white dudes like me, and so it's worth doing for the sake of the community itself. It's worth doing. So I find the energy and get on with it.
I would have thought you would have to prioritize even further if this is like, Michael and I have a day job, so there's money coming in, but you have to do a lot of other stuff, or you're doing it. I'm not sure if you have to do it like this, but I would think that there's a point where you say, well, I could write another book which generates some income, or I do more of the podcast.
Okay, but the kind of creative energy that the podcast requires is different to the kind of creative energy writing a book requires, right? So they don't come out of quite the same energy budget. In the same way that, if you did 1 million push-ups yesterday, you can still do your rapier footwork today, because although your shoulders are shot, your legs are fine, right? So, I usually schedule my podcast interviews for the afternoon, where I've done my hard thinking creative stuff in the morning already, and then in the afternoon I have an interview, which is basically me just chatting to an interesting person, right? And I often have a little nap before I have an interview, right? Because kids are at school or whatever, and the house is quiet, have a little nap, then have the interview, and then it's not usually coming out of time I would normally spend writing. I would normally spend that time, if I wasn't interviewing, I would be doing something that is not sitting at the computer and, typing. It would be maybe woodwork in my shed, or admin, or whatever else.
I see. So how would you describe the energy level that you use?
That was my question too now.
Sorry, I didn't catch the question.
So what kind of energy do you use for podcasting? Like, how would you describe it?
Okay, there's different phases, right? There's looking for people to interview. Is probably the hardest bit because it requires sort of focused attention and analysis, and then it requires crafting the correct approach if I don't know them. I mean, if they're friends. And it's funny, if any of my friends are listening to this and they're wondering why they haven't been asked yet, it's because I keep a reserve of people I know I can just call and say, would you please come on my show? And I can kind of trust them to say yes. And, so I kind of I keep those in reserve, and I try and look for people who you would not expect to hear from, right? Perhaps the most extreme example of this is I've had Ariel Anderson, who is a BDSM model, on, and because get this is classic, right? I was scrolling through Twitter looking for guests, and I saw this woman naked doing the splits, right? And I chatted to the camera or something, and on the wall behind her head was a pair of antique French foils.
Probably not what other people saw in that picture.
Probably not. why does this very flexible naked woman have antique French foils? and so, I contacted her and I asked her. I think I may have even put it in the Twitter comment, like, what are those swords on the wall behind you? and so she ended up following me on Twitter, and we would chat back and forth every now and then. She's a really nice person. And then I was like, she said something about, I knew that she had some, stage combat training.
Okay.
She'd mentioned it at some point. And I thought, well, okay, there's a plausible sword connection there. But she said something about representation for sex workers, right? And I was like, well, hang on, my podcast is entirely all about representation. So I invited her onto the show. And she was like, really? Okay. And we had this fantastic conversation. She's absolutely lovely. She's since been round for dinner with, my kids and my wife and everything. And we all just get on famously. But the world is wider than many people wish to see. And so the whole point of the show is breadth. And why not have Ariel on? She's interesting. It was a fantastic conversation. And we even went into things like investing in property so that when she can no longer do BDSM modeling for a living, because apparently it's actually quite hard work, particularly some of the bondage stuff. It's quite stressful, physically stressful. What's she going to retire on? Well, so she has this portfolio of apartments that she rents out. It's a fascinating conversation. Okay, I slightly lost my thread. How did we get onto Ariel?
It was
different kinds of energy.
Yeah.
So looking for people is then figuring out how you're going to contact them if you don't know them, and then making those contacts, and then doing the research, coming up with the questions. That's often the stickiest bit for me, because really I'd like them to just show up and we just chat, and that'd be great. But I promise questions, and so I do the research and I come up with it. But it feels a bit kind of weird doing that, just because it's like you go to their LinkedIn profile, you go to their
a bit like stalking them professionally, of course.
Yeah, exactly. And I'd always try to find a question that they probably haven't been asked before, right? Something a little bit different. And also, if I don't know them, something that will demonstrate to them that I've done the research. Because again, it makes them feel like I'm taking them seriously. They're more likely to be comfortable. They're more likely to feel like they're being respected. They're more likely to open up and actually talk to me. So that's probably the hardest bit. Then there's the scheduling is a pain.
Yeah,
because of time
it's a lot of
pain. But it's just that's just admin. The actual interview itself, it's hugely dependent on the guest, right? Some guests, you just welcome onto the show and they just talk, and it's brilliant. And all you have to do is just put in a little anecdote or a little question or something every now and then, and you just get this fascinating, erudite, articulate, easily transcribed conversation. Other guests, awkward pause, and I have in the past. There's this fantastic thing in Audacity I discovered because I had this one guest, very lovely guest, very interesting person, not a sort of steady conversationalist, like to put in long pauses. There's this thing on Audacity where you can trim any
silence
that's longer than a certain a certain length. You can trim it down to that length, right? And when I hit that button, in a 1 hour, 20-minute episode, we got down to just under an hour.
And I mean, it makes the people sound smarter, because if you have things that you really need to think about, and suddenly you just spurt them out, like it came up to you in a moment, it makes you sound like, oh
totally,
my God,
totally sovereign,
know so much.
bam.
And like the editing isn't that hard. It doesn't take very long, because again, I don't usually go through and do cutting out the sounds and the ums, and I don't normally touch those. I just let it run as it is. I just run a filter curve, mostly to take out the hissing S sounds, normalize loudness, do any noise cancellation that needs to be done, and then run a limiter on it so it's all within So it's all a comfortable listening volume. And that's what Gethin Edwards taught me in that session that I hired him to teach. And, and then it comes out it's free. So it has to be good enough, but it doesn't have to be stellar.
Yeah, especially because it seems it's more natural if you have those arms it can be too much if you have someone that just says, I did this, but in general, it seems more natural, not as scripted as like a perfectly produced TV show or something.
Yeah, exactly. But, I've just produced an online course about how to teach historical martial arts, and that is mostly delivered as audio files because most of it is theory, right? Like, how do you run a class? How do you plan a class? What are you looking for when your students are doing these various things? And it's fundamentally theory.
Yeah.
Right. Because it's not when I'm running a course that is, let's say, sword and buckler, I'll on video show a technique. I say, okay, go practice that. And there'll be a thing saying hit pause, and they're supposed to go away and practice. And when they come back, they hit play and they get the next bit. Right. That's not how you can't do how to teach like that because they're not experiencing the course while they're teaching a class because that would be weird.
Yeah.
Right. So it's delivered as audio files primarily with some video where necessary and loads of handouts and PDFs and whatnot. But the audio, I went and hired a professional recording studio and an engineer, and that audio is as clean and as perfect as I can make it.
Yes.
Right. Because people are paying for it.
Yeah, I had a conversation with a friend of mine, and we were talking about giving online courses. It was during Corona time, and like giving workshops online. Mm-hmm. And he said, you can have shitty video. You can have no video at all, but you have to have good sound. Otherwise, people are jumping off. And so it's actually an absolutely right decision to put as much effort on audio as possible.
And like in my early online video courses, I just used the sound. I mean, I had enough sense to put a lavalier mic on and record it onto my phone and then stitch it together with a video. So at least it was recorded locally. But I didn't know how to do any kind of proper like audio care, right? But the video stuff I've produced since starting the podcast, right? I get that audio and I clean it up the same way I clean up the podcast audio and stitch it back together. So the audio is better on the videos now than it was.
Yes, perfect.
2 years ago.
I mean, also, it's noticeable that from the English HEMA podcast, I mean, there are more than just yours. You have decent audio quality and you have constant audio quality. It's not like one episode is fine, the next is kind of off the charts. And many of the other English HEMA podcasts don't have decent audio quality. I find this a bit strange because many of these things you can do automatically with the tool. Like you need to find a button and that's it. And there are even tools that do this automatically, like some web servers that you can pay a bit of money. And like that people record with bad microphones and loud environments don't equalize the loudness level. And I mean, you can do that the first couple of episodes, but some of those podcasts are 50 episodes in, and I don't get why they don't take a bit more care about the audio quality, because that's the only thing that really matters in a podcast.
I can tell you why I did it, right? It's because I don't really hear it. I am not a very sort of audio person, right? I am quite happy if I'm putting music on while I'm cooking or something. I will have it on my phone, some MP3 or whatever, and stick it in a pint glass to amplify it a bit, and that's fine, right? I know people who literally choose their furniture for its audio acoustic properties, so that when their incredibly expensive and beautiful hi-fi is trying to reproduce this incredibly perfectly produced sound stuff, their furniture doesn't mess it up by bouncing the sound around in an annoying way. Right? That's how I am with swords. It's not how I am with audio. So it took, like, I think it was the second or third episode where several people, because I got it particularly bad in that one. It was the one with Kaya Sadowski. And, you know, one chap, Joe in Boston. Joe, if you're listening, thank you very much. This was extremely useful. He said, okay, download Audacity. And then he sent me a series of screenshots of what I could do to fix that episode. Right?
Yeah, really?
So I
That's
did
really
that.
nice.
Yeah. Right. I did that, and that made the episode, and I re-uploaded the audio so it was improved. Right?
Yeah.
And then I thought, hang on. The people who listen to this, enough of them actually care that I have to up my game. And so that's when I hired Gethin to actually teach me how to do a competent basic job of getting the audio sorted out. So I'm guessing that the people who are producing these other podcasts, which have inconsistent sound quality like that, either their audience doesn't include useful people like Joe who will say, actually, your audio is shit, Guy, you need to fix it. And perhaps they don't have the budget to hire somebody to teach them how to do it properly, right? Or maybe it's some sort of combination of that.
Yeah, I think you have to keep in mind where your listeners are going to listen to the podcast. For example, like when they're cooking or when they're doing something else, it might add some noise as well in the car. Exactly. Like a couple of months ago, I had downloaded multiple episodes from basically all of the English HEMA-Podcasts. I was doing a bit of research, like, do they have interesting guests, interesting topics, maybe something we should cover as well. And I was driving in the car with my girlfriend, and we tried to listen to some of the episodes. And I remember one very clearly where it was three folks talking, and it was an interesting topic. I was really curious to hear what they had to say, but the loudness difference was so large that I had to constantly turn the volume knob to be able to hear the quietest one and not get my ears blown out by the loudest one. And it was such a shame because the conversation was interesting, but after 15 minutes, I was like, this couldn't go on. It was not possible to actually physically listen to it. And this is such a shame.
Yeah. And here's the thing. I am not an audio person, as I've said. So I actually do my audio editing visually because I'm looking at that kind of jaggedy line that goes up and down that is the kind of the sound represented visually in Audacity. I don't even know what the name of that is.
The waveform. The
waveform, that's it, thank you. Right. And I do the things I need to do to make the waveform look right. And
fair enough.
Occasionally, I'll listen to a bit and it'll go, and I'll go, oh yeah, that doesn't sound right. And I'm getting better at actually listening to it, but I actually I do my audio engineering visually, which is completely and utterly wrong and stupid, but it produces the necessary result. But I will never be a competent audio engineer. I just don't listen to my ears hard enough.
Yeah, but as to say, it's free content, so if it's good enough, it's good enough. Like, people can't expect everything to be perfect if you don't earn money with it.
Right. Yeah. So you guys, do you fence together? Whereabouts actually are you? I know you're both in Germany, but are you in the same sort of area or?
Actually not at all. We are like 500 kilometers away from each other.
Okay, so Michael, where are you?
I live in Dresden.
Okay. I've heard of Dresden. There's nice china there, I've heard.
Mm-hmm.
Dresden china, it's famous.
Dresden what?
China.
Like porcelain.
Porcelain.
Yes. But actually it's more, it belongs to a city next to Dresden. It's called Meißen. Meißner porcelain. That's very famous.
Yeah, but in England we're not terribly educated. We just call it Dresden china.
Yes. Exactly.
How about you, Alexander? Whereabouts are you?
I'm in Ulm.
Where is that?
Yeah, I know that. No one knows Ulm. It's between Munich and Stuttgart. So right on the border of Bavaria and Baden-Württemberg. And you get an Ulm fact right now, because Ulm has the highest church.
No one ever, Alex had no one ever told before this fact.
Okay, well,
but not to an English crowd.
Okay, sorry, say it again, Alexander. You were rudely interrupted by Michael. Michael, stay quiet.
Ulm has the highest church tower in the world, the Ulmer Minster.
Ulmer Minster is the highest church tower in the world.
Yeah, no one knows this besides the people in Ulm and the people in Cologne, because they have the second highest.
And they're very, very jealous.
I hope so.
Is that the cathedral in Cologne?
Yeah.
Well, okay, I've got a story about that. In 2006, in April, I was in I was teaching a seminar for Stefan Dieck, who lives near Cologne. And we went into Cologne with my girlfriend at the time. And I thought, okay, we're going to go up the top of the cathedral. I told Stefan to make himself scarce and opened a little box with a ring in it so he knew what was going on. So he would make himself scarce. And I thought, at the top of Cologne Cathedral, I will propose to this woman, and then this will be very romantic and beautiful and nice. And of course, we went up into Cologne Cathedral, and it's full of graffiti and stuff, and it was absolutely packed with irritating school children. Right?
Yeah,
so we got all the way up to the
imagine.
top, and I was just looking for a quiet spot to get down on one knee and everything, and it wasn't going to happen. And so we came out and I was like, oh, fuck, okay, what am I going to do now? And then we were passing by a jeweler's shop and my wife was like, oh, that's a very nice ring. Kind of, that's when a woman in that situation says something like that, that's basically a hint, that's a very nice ring, Guy. So I just pulled the box out and I said, well, I've got a better one here.
Well, there's
But what I should have gone to Ulm, so I could have proposed at the top of the tallest church tower in the world. But no, I slummed it in Cologne, and even that didn't work. So
it's quite nice up there, actually.
We have
A
two
lot of
kids
stuff,
in
but
Bristol.
yeah.
We had our 16th wedding anniversary just last week.
But I mean, the story is much better than proposing on the top of Kölner Dom.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I have a better one here. That's
great comeback.
It was just frustration. It was like I'd been like trying to give her this bloody ring all morning, and I was like, "Oh fuck it, there you go."
So this is something that is brought up regularly, like, oh, you know, that one time.
No. She was very pleased. So basically, she didn't really matter how it was delivered, as long as it was delivered with the right intent, and that was fine.
I see. Yeah. I mean, we have met before the podcast and we fenced with each other, but we're not in the same club. And I think that actually helped because since we do 2/3 of the episode together, if we also train to the same club, it would be too same. We need to have a bit of conflict and a bit of a differing opinion.
So what sort of systems and styles do you practice?
For me, it's pretty straightforward, old school Lichtenauer stuff. Like, I prefer the stuff in the Peter von Danzig manual.
Okay.
And it's mainly like bit of grappling, bit of sword and buckler, bit of dagger, and longsword. So the main part,
So classic medieval Lichtenauer
yeah.
stuff. Excellent. Okay, and von Danzig for preference. That's a good choice. It's a solid, well worked out source. I'm very envious that you can actually read the German though, because I can't read German, which is why I don't do the German stuff with any seriousness. How about you, Alexander?
Yeah, I used to do pretty much the same thing, old school Lichtenauer, for the first 10 years of my HEMA career. And last year I switched to rapier. I still teach longsword, but I only fence rapier now.
Ooh, rapier. What
Yes.
in what style?
I do read a lot of Giganti, and I tried Fabris, but I'm not flexible enough in the hip to actually do Fabris. But yeah, really,
Really, at your age?
Yeah, I'm not.
Okay, dude, you need to get your hamstrings sorted out, because I would guess, we've never met or anything, so this is just a guess, I would guess that your problem with Fabris is not flexibility, is that your hamstrings are shorter than they should be.
Yeah, probably.
Right, which is preventing you from keeping your spine in a neutral position while you're hinged at the hip forward, as you need to be for Fabris, right? So, yes, I have a workout for hamstring flexibility that I will send you a link. You can put it in the show notes if anyone's listening wants to have a go at it. So that, if you get your hamstrings to their proper length, you shouldn't have. I mean, I'm 49. Oh, I will be in a couple of months. 48 at the moment. I have no problem with Fabris's guard positions and strikes and stuff.
I was definitely trying out, but I'm not 100% sure that this is easily fixable, because I think since I'm like maybe 8 or something, I was not able to touch the ground with straight knees.
Okay.
So I really only started doing sport when I was 25, when I started HEMA. So I'm not sure how much of the damage has been done.
It doesn't matter, right?
Yeah.
Because most of the flexibility we're talking about is in where the stretch reflex is in the muscle, right? So all you really have to do is over a period of weeks and months, reset the stretch reflex and allow the muscle to get longer, and then don't strain things too much for 9 months to a year while your soft tissues, tendons and ligaments and what have you are getting used to this longer range of motion. But at no point should you be deliberately stretching tendons or ligaments.
Okay.
Right? You should only be stretching the muscle. And the muscle can take any amount of shit, right? They are astonishingly robust when it comes to handling training damage, right? The injuries that matter are the injuries to soft tissues like tendons and ligaments, or injuries to joint capsules, cartilage, that sort of thing. A muscle can be trained to do almost anything. So you should just consider it. Now, I have absolutely no business giving you any kind of historical fencing advice that you haven't asked for, but it's just one way, you get me on your show, I assume you're interested in my opinion, and so I just dumped a whole lot of totally unsolicited advice.
Yeah, feel free to do so.
I apologize, but
so what is the expectation? Like, how fast will I see some results at least? What do you think?
Okay, when you're doing the kind of flexibility training that I'm talking about, you should notice significant increased range of motion, particularly in the beginning. Usually there's quite a big gain in the beginning and then it slows down a bit. 3 weeks.
Okay.
Right. 4 times a week for maybe 15, 20 minutes a time for maybe 3 or 4 weeks. And you should see a noticeable difference.
Okay, that's definitely a time frame I can try it out.
Yeah. Then if you don't see any change in that time, then the problem with your getting into a Fabris guard is not your hamstring flexibility, it's something else. And then what we should do is we should get on a thing so I can actually have a look at how you're moving, and then we'll figure out what else it is. But 9 times out of 10, problems with Fabris come from modern people sitting in chairs too much who have very short hamstrings.
Yeah, well, that's exactly what I do the whole time.
Right, there we go. So we'll see. So
definitely going to give it a try.
Good. So you're a Giganti fan and a Fabris fan. But Fabris
so far, not a Fabris fan, because if I can go into the positions, not much of a fan. But he writes a lot of interesting stuff on tactics and so on.
Yeah. No Capoferro?
I took a look at it, and it's also interesting, but it didn't dive any deeper.
Okay. So you're a Giganti then, through and through.
So far, yes, but I think it's kind of a liberal way to look at Giganti. I mean, do you know Rob Giles, the American rapier fencer?
Yeah, I know of him.
So I was at the European Games in Minsk, 2019, and I saw him fence there. And at that point, I dabbled a bit in rapier, but I wasn't really serious about it. And the stuff he was doing with his left hand, like all the waving and the finger movement and so on, it kind of spoke to me. It was like, oh, you can do that. Like, I like to mentally manipulate opponents while fencing, and wait, if I have a free hand, I can do this even more. This is great. I'm going to try this out. So I'm kind of looking forward to receiving his book and seeing what he has to say about it.
Okay. Yeah, I've seen his book, and he's fundamentally a sport fencer, because what he cares about is winning tournaments. He doesn't actually care about historical accuracy or duels or that sort of stuff. He is all about winning tournaments, and he's very good at it. So that's his entire focus.
Do you think he would agree with this?
Basically, I think it's unarguable based on his book. I mean, for instance, in his school, they have a ranking system, and the only way to move up through the ranks is to win tournaments.
Okay, that's pretty straightforward,
right? So there's no question that what he values most is success in tournaments, because literally the only way to advance through the ranks in his school is to win tournaments with certain number of participants. So, like in the lower ranks, if there's only 10 people in the pool in your tournament, then and you win that's fine to get up to like the first grade. And then by the time you get to the higher grades, there have to be at least 80 people in the tournament or whatever. I'm not quoting. I'm just giving you the idea of how that tournament structure, how that grading structure works. And it's right there. You'll see when the book arrives, he's absolutely explicit about it. I mean,
Right.
He doesn't pretend that he's doing anything else.
I see.
Fair enough.
Yeah,
Yeah,
totally
fair
fair enough. And the thing is, honestly, the one thing the historical martial arts tournament scene could really use is a dose of like serious competitive professionalism. There's a reason why Robert wins everything. It's because he takes it very seriously and he trains very seriously for the tournament. So,
how do you see the historical European martial tournament scene? If not professional, what is your view on the tournament scene?
Okay, it's not professional because no one is making a living by winning tournaments.
All right.
Right? In the same way, a professional tennis player makes a living by doing well in tournaments, right? And they make a living from prize money and from endorsements and that sort of thing, okay? So there is a very clear path to being a professional tennis player, which involves entirely being good in tournaments. And then there's a sort of side track, an alternative career path in professional tennis, which is being a professional tennis coach. And sometimes people go from one track to the other, but sometimes they just go on those two separate tracks because the qualities that make a good coach are not necessarily the qualities that make for a good competitor, for instance. I mean, like, if you look at, like, I don't know, gymnastics, for instance, and look at the coaches, there's absolutely no way that, what's her name, that American gymnast, Biles is her surname? I've forgotten her first name.
I don't know her.
Something like that. Anyway, I mean, she's won, like, gold medals and Olympics and whatnot, right? Unbelievable gymnast. Watch her stuff and you go like, holy shit, what's that? Human beings are not supposed to be able to do this. There's no way on earth her coach could do that, right? But her coach can get her to do that and she wins medals with it, and that's the point, right?
Yep.
But the historical martial arts tournament scene is a fantastically useful thing for everyone, whether they take part in it or not, because it provides a place for people who want tournaments to go. It provides I would say perhaps every martial artist should have tournament experience in their training at some point in their career, because it teaches you things that nothing else will teach you. And it also creates a market for all sorts of useful equipment, you know, fencing jackets and whatever. But the issue with it is that it creates artifacts. The rule sets create artifacts, and the choice of equipment creates artifacts that basically mean that the historical fencing tournament scene isn't really historical fencing at all most of the time, right? It's mostly tournament fencing, right? It's basically, they've created their own sport, right? And that's a fantastically good thing to do, and I have no quarrel with it whatsoever. But the problem is that, firstly, they haven't sorted out the safety, right? You absolutely should not be doing longsword in a tournament with a fencing mask on. It will not protect you from concussions. It is just a disaster waiting to happen. The plastic gauntlets are totally inadequate. People get their fingers broken and stuff all the time. There isn't a proper education of fencers to be able to handle the grappling stuff. And so either they don't allow the grappling stuff, which basically is totally anti-historical, or they allow the grappling stuff and it creates safety issues for people who don't have that training. It's a very kind of complex phenomenon that has all these fantastic things in it. I think really what would be ideal is if they just drop the H, right? And they don't even try to make it historical, because it isn't. There's nothing historical about it. The weapons aren't historical, the equipment's not historical, the rule sets aren't historical, whatever. And then it can become its own thing and become a really well-structured, well-run tournament environment where martial artists can go to have that experience.
That's super interesting that you mentioned that, because I had a discussion with another trainer like a week ago, and we talked about like historical fencing and sports fencing, and he said Well, actually, there should be sports fencing, and you should divide it in the Olympic, like foil, épée, and saber, and like other weapons, longsword, rapier,
longsword, whatever. Yeah, I agree.
Stuff like that. And but that's as you say, it's sports fencing. We created a sport, and we're fencing like sports fences with different rules, but I mean, it's about winning in the environment of a certain rule set, and it's just other weapons.
Right, and again, see, when I say things like that, people often interpret that as I'm somehow against the tournament scene. I'm not. I just wish it would become its own thing properly and get a bit more professional about how it's run, so that it's more consistent. Right, like a sport fencing tournament with Olympic fencing is fundamentally the same wherever you go. The rules are the same, the equipment's the same, the safety regulations are the same. It's established, right? And because it's so well established and has been established for so long, you can be a professional fencer. You can win chunks of money, right? And actually, and when the stakes are high, you get a different level of pressure, right? Which is just, fascinatingly useful to anyone who's interested in training martial arts. Right, because one of the biggest problems we face is how do we recreate pressure in a way that doesn't kill people?
Yeah,
right. One simple way to do that is just to raise the stakes. Like, let's say you and I hope if I'm ever in Dresden, we'll cross swords in a friendly and fun fashion and whack each other about the head and shoulders with long swords, because why not, right? And that would be fun and interesting and useful. If we wanted to put some pressure on it, we could simply say, well, okay, we each put, 500 euros down, and the winner keeps it, right? And that would it would change it completely, right? And it would change it from being collegial to being truly competitive, right? There's all sorts of ways that we can, I'm not suggesting that would be a sensible thing to do, because I have no particular interest in competitive fencing anymore. I did my sport fencing in the 80s and 90s. I don't need to do it in the 2020s. But when the stakes are high, people behave differently. I was at Lord Baltimore's Challenge in July, fantastic event. And the real function of the event is to get the SCA and historical martial arts people together, because we have a lot more in common than we do have differences. And the area of overlap is enormous. And so it was, the first day was all tournament. And, the way, I was a ring director, the way I run a ring is, I don't, if whoever got the hit is not absolutely clear, I just throw it out. I don't discuss it. I don't try and figure out what happened, because the point of all this fencing experience is to get better at fencing. And when a really good fencer is up against someone who's much less good than they are, and they just effortlessly control their opponent's blade and hit them however they like, it's obvious to everyone what just happened. There's no question. So in the tournament, if the purpose of the tournament is to create better fencers, as I think it should be if there isn't a major cash prize, then I'm not going to waste everybody's time going, well, actually, okay, according to the rules, then maybe this thing coming over here has slightly more priority. I don't give a shit, right? And I explained to the fencers, you must assume that I am drunk, blind, and biased against you. You have to make it so that I cannot deny you the hit, because it's so obvious, even to a drunk, blind, biased person, where the hit went. And if you don't make it that obvious, I'm just going to throw it out, right? And it was great. I mean, we got through so much fencing. I mean, I personally presided over, it must have been 70 or 80 bouts that day, right? That was a long day.
I can imagine.
But there was lots and lots of fencing going on. And because they knew they couldn't get away with scrappy shit, right? We got some really good fencing out of these people, right? Because the environment we created demanded it. You're not going to score a hit if it's unclear, right? So get control of the situation and hit your opponent in such a way that is obvious, which creates better fences. Yeah. But there were some people there from the historical martial arts crowd who were expecting something more like a classic, should we say, HEMA tournament, where there are coaches who get to discuss judgment calls with the referees and whatnot. It's like, I'm not having any of that. I don't care who actually got the hit. If they didn't clearly control their opponent's weapon such that it's obvious to everyone who got the hit, I don't care. Do it again. Do it better. Right? And so the environment that we create when we're running a tournament pretty much determines the behavior you're going to get, and it determines whether people come out of it as better fencers or better competitors, which are not necessarily the same thing. Sorry, that actually went on a bit of a ramble. I kind of lost my thread. What were we talking about?
We're talking about HEMA tournaments and becoming professional, the HEMA tournament scene becoming more professional, and what would it make, or what would it take to become a professional HEMA tournament fighter, fencer.
Okay, I have a little anecdote there, right? When I was producing my book, Theory and Practice of Historical Martial Arts, as I normally do when I publish a book, I sent out some copies of I was hoping somewhat finished draft to a bunch of beta readers, right? And it had a section in it on how to win tournaments, which is really, really simple and straightforward. What you do is you look at the rules, you figure out how you're going to apply your strengths to winning according to those rules, and you watch carefully how your most likely opponents who are going to get you kicked out of the tournament because they're going to beat you, how do they fence, and you construct a strategy for defeating those specific people, and you train that with your coach. And the whole thing is soulless and not historical martial artsy at all, but that's how actual competitors actually win actual serious tournaments, right? You only have to read Johan Hammenberg's Epee 2.0 to get an inside track on how he got 2 Olympic gold medals, right? He was so dedicated to that he knew that he was most likely to fence one of his Epee teammates in the final for the men's individual, right? And so every time he fenced that person in training, he used a particular approach, and then in the final, he had a completely different approach prepared. So that guy was expecting him to fence a certain way, and he slaughtered him because he fenced in a completely different way that he had prepared, because he had anticipated this moment of being in the Olympic final for the men's single. He knew it was likely to be this particular teammate, and so he created a strategy for defeating that particular person. And at the end of it, the guy came out saying, "You didn't fence like that in practice." And he replied, "That wasn't practice." Right? It's like, dude, take it seriously. Be content with your silver medal. And so I had basically summarized the approach that serious competitors take to winning serious tournaments in the book. And one of the most significant bits of feedback I got from it was like, "Guy, that's horrible." It's like it's just horrible. And so I added a big chunk of, okay, that's how you win tournaments, but this is how you should use them for your development as a martial artist, right? Which is not the same approach at all.
So speaking of books, I think you mentioned in the podcast with Daniel Jacquet that you get around half your incomes with the royalties and the sales from your books, something like this. So did the podcast actually help you? Like, did you see some other benefits besides the direct Patreon and so on, like more book sales or whatever, or getting more known in the scene?
Very hard. Okay, it's very hard to say. So far, I don't think so.
Okay.
I say that because, every now and then I do try and actually sell a book through the podcast. Like I'll run a discount on one of my books on my online store, and people can go and buy it. And so far, not a single person has ever used one of those discount codes.
Okay, how often have you tried?
Often enough. And the thing is, it goes out to enough people that if that was going to work, it would have worked at least once by now.
Okay, right? That's unexpected.
So what you do is you tell the discount code in the podcast, and then you...
No, what I do is I say, I create what's called a pretty link, which is a redirectable link that is simple and easy to, like, for example, the last one was guywindsor.net/TSG for the sword guy, 22 for the year, right? So they could type guywindsor.net/TSG 22, and that would direct them to this place where I was selling actually the audiobook of Theory and Practice. So I think, you like listening to audio about swords. Maybe you want an audiobook about swords, sword fighting, whatever. There you go. And not a single person has used that discount. Not one.
I mean, the method is solid because that's how other advertisers track their revenue when they do podcast advertisement.
Right. Exactly. And I don't know what it is. I don't know why it doesn't work the way it seems to work for everyone else. But I don't fundamentally care, because the purpose of the podcast is not to sell my books, right? I know it's doing the other things, because people come up at events, for example, and they tell me that, yes, I got into historical martial arts because a friend of mine forwarded one of your episodes to me and I listened to it and I thought it sounded really interesting. And obviously people like me are welcome. I was like, that's exactly what it's all about.
Oh, really? That's
right?
nice.
So I know it's doing that, and that's what I actually care about. I have other ways of selling books, Facebook ads, or, my email list is what normally actually sells stuff. So like when I launch a course to my email list, that usually does okay. But the podcast doesn't make any money that I can tell. And here's the thing.
Yeah.
August this year was the worst month for book sales I've ever had, right? I mean, literally 6 years ago, where I had no podcast, no email newsletters, none of that stuff, and I had half as many books, my August sales in 2016 were 4 times bigger than my August sales in 2022. That can't be just me.
Yeah.
Right? That isn't, that's just, because normally, like, book sales are up maybe 50% over 2016, right? So I think that was probably some larger cultural thing. It's like, oh my God, it's the first summer we've had without COVID, so we can all go out and do stuff and not buy books.
Yeah.
Right. I think that may have had more to do with it.
So what does a good month So what does a good month and a bad month look like in book sales? I'm kind of curious, just some ballpark figure. Like, do you sell thousands of books, hundreds, millions?
No. In a really good month, I might sell 150 books.
Okay.
All right.
That's a really good month. The thing is, because I publish them myself, I see maybe 200 books. I don't know. I don't pay that close attention to the data. The only reason I actually looked at the 2016 versus 2022 thing is because when I got my publisher conversation report from Ingram Spark with my biggest sales are always in the US. The US sales were like, I was like, that can't be right. That seems to be missing a 0. Right? It was ridiculous. It's like, no, there aren't enough figures there. There should be more figures there. So I went and compared it to, I sort of dug up the same report thing from 2016. Yep. It was like, yeah, that isn't right. But yeah, I guess a really good month, maybe 200 books. But because I publish them myself. Well, I don't publish all my books myself, but the only ones I really pay attention to are the ones I publish myself. I'm not making 10% when a book sells. I'm making closer to 50.
I see.
So it's like a commercially published author making. Yeah, actually, the way the deals are going now, it's like a commercially published author selling 10 times as many books.
I mean, but if I get it right, or if I remember it right, you started out with the classical route of going, like getting some book deals. And then when you had some books out there, you had an audience, you had your mailing list, I guess. Then you started to go into the self-publishing route, right?
No, not quite. No, what happened was my first 2 books were published by Freelance Academy Press.
Yeah.
And I signed a non-disclosure agreement about what exactly happened, but it is public record that in, I think it was 2011, 8 Freelance Academy Press. Freelance Dudes are absolutely fine and complete. No. I got the name wrong. Beg pardon. Chivalry Bookshelf was the one in 2006. Okay. Freelance Academy Press didn't even exist yet. If Greg, Christian, that lot are listening to me, I apologize. I misspoke. No, it was Chivalry Bookshelf, published my first 2 books. And in, I think it's 2011, 8 authors published by Chivalry Bookshelf. were involved in a class action suit against Chivalry Bookshelf for not paying royalties, basically. And one of the results of that suit, the rest of which I'm not at liberty to discuss because of legal whatchamacallits, was I got the rights back to those 2 books. And so at the same time, it was around that sort of time, Greg Melee and Christian Tober were putting together Freelance Academy Press, and they, I didn't think they'd probably want those 2 books because they were quite old. So I thought, okay, I'll publish them myself. And I asked around, and this was before self-publishing became a really kind of mainstream thing to do. So I had to get a commercial account with Lightning Source rather than, because Ingram Spark didn't even exist yet. KDP weren't doing paperbacks yet either. KDP was also fairly young. Kindle came out in 2007, I think. So I published those 2 books. I basically paid someone to create printable files for me, and I did a bit of updating work on Source's Companion to kind of, because it's very out of date. And I published those, and then there were, around about the same sort of time, Freelance Academy Press published my Medieval Dagger book, but they dragged their feet on my Medieval Longsword book, right? They had it on time, and 2 years later, it still hadn't come out. And so I broke the contract with them because I can't afford to have my work just sat in somebody's computer for 2 years.
Yeah, it's not a hobby project for you.
Yeah,
it's not an option for me because this is my job.
Yeah,
right. And so I took it back from them, and then I crowdfunded publishing that myself, and that went pretty well. And then got that into the system. And by that point, I had a kind of a system for having written a book. I could get it edited, laid out, given a cover and everything, all the necessary things, and then uploaded to all the various platforms so they could be printed and distributed and all that sort of thing. Because one of the things that made this actually workable is print-on-demand technology. So I don't have a stock of books in my house that I then distribute, right? If you went to your local bookshop and ordered one of my books, they would put in an order. The order would go to the printer with the money attached to it, and the printer would print and ship the book and then give me some of the money, right? It's completely automated. And so...
those 2 experiences sound not exactly fun, like the joy of an author's life.
Yeah. Really, my experience of publishers has been it's better to do it yourself.
Yeah.
And that's also it. I control it. Like if I want to update the covers, I could do it. I have done. If I want to make an update to the inside, like the back matter, for instance, when I produce a new book, I should update the back matter for the other books so the new book is included in the back of the older books, right? That sort of thing. When I produced online courses, I put a link to my online Medieval Longsword course into the back of the Medieval Longsword book so that people who like the book and want to go for the course, they have a discount code and they can go and find the course, right?
Yeah, I have one of your books here. Sorry.
Mm-hmm. Because I'm technically the publisher, I can update stuff whenever I want. I don't have to run it by anybody. And so I'm in control of the whole situation.
So I have one of your books here, and I think it was one with a publisher because it's translated in German, and the cover has some guy in some not exactly historical armor here, and it looks...
Yeah. Okay, there's a story there. Oh my God. Right. The book you're talking about, let me grab it. It's Handbuch Schwertkampf.
Yeah, exactly, this one.
Right, okay. This is The Swordsman's Companion, as published in 2004. Translated into German. Yeah. Now, the thing is, Chivalry Bookshelf did a deal with Wieland Verlaget. I'm probably pronouncing that incorrectly. But Wieland, it is Wieland Verlaget, isn't it? That's the correct. No, Wieland Verlag. Verlag is the Swedish thing. So Wieland is the publisher. And what happened was, Chivalry Bookshelf did a deal with Wieland that a book that Wieland had published would be sent to Chivalry Bookshelf, translated into English and published there. And my book would be sent to Wieland and published in Germany. I didn't know anything about it. I was not informed of this. Right? One of the reasons why perhaps a lawsuit was not unreasonable. Right? And the results, the way they intended to do it was I would get royalties for the English language German book published by Chivalry.
Yeah.
And the German author would get royalties for my book published in German through Wieland for reasons I cannot explain.
Doesn't sound fair. Okay.
No, it's fucked up. So then this book came out, and one of my friends, I think it was Jörg Bellinghausen, contacted me saying, "Guy, congratulations on your book, blah, blah, blah." And I, "What do you mean?" And I looked, I was like, "Fuck." Right, because they had changed stuff, and like they'd missed out a photo credit, and they'd missed out, no one had, they'd added pictures. Like, there's a
really?
On page 10, there's a very stupid picture of two, they look like they're doing some kind of reenactment stuff, maybe early Bohurt, something like that, right?
Yeah.
With heater shields and helmets and stuff. It's like, that, nothing to do with my book. Like, completely unrelated. They just dropped that in off their own bat just because they think they have. I was absolutely fucking steaming, right?
Yeah,
Firstly,
I
that
can
it
imagine.
published without my knowledge or consent. Secondly, that not only had they published it without my knowledge and consent, they gone and added shit, right? I was so angry. Anyway.
So I guess this colored your perception of why self-publishing is the route to go, because then stuff like this can't happen.
Well, there's a very important script to this. Not that long later, when I got my rights back from Chivalry Bookshelf, a chap working for Wieland contacted me to say, "Guy, now that this all has happened, then obviously that deal with Chivalry Bookshelf is no longer in force. We're very sorry you didn't know about it. We assumed that your publisher would tell you and it was all right. But it means that, of course, that now you are entitled to the royalties from this book. Where should we send €1,500? Right? I was like, oh, right. I mean, so Wieland, in every aspect of this, acted in good faith.
Yeah.
And since then have published a couple of my books in translation. They've done Medieval Longsword, they passed on Medieval Dagger, and they've had the pictures and the text for doing the Duelist Companion. And I reshot all the pictures because the pictures we had weren't up to their specs. So I flew to Finland, organised a photo shoot, and reshot all the pictures for the Duelist Companion so that the German edition would have nice new shiny pictures.
But that was with your knowledge and consent.
That was entirely with my enthusiastic consent and complete knowledge. And yeah, I mean, it was when they contacted me and said, "Well, look, obviously you're entitled to these royalties." I was like, okay, they made an honest mistake that was not their fault. Yeah. And they are an entirely reputable and good company that I'm very happy to do business with. But particularly, this is going out in Germany, right? So I just really want to emphasize Wieland, top chaps.
But did I get it right that your books are now printed on demand? So if I go to a bookstore and say I want to buy this book, then it's printed on that very day or in the next days and sent to me.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and the same as if you go to an online, go to an online bookseller of some kind.
Yeah, but there's no how do you say, storage stock?
Well,
yes.
Okay. I think for the German ones, I think Wieland, they do short run print runs because they are set up for printing books in runs of maybe 1,000 copies or whatever, and then storing them and then sending them out. I think the Wieland ones are short run, but they're the publishers. That's their business. I don't care. That's entirely up to them. My stuff, I don't have the time and setup to be packing and shipping books myself. So yeah, that's all entirely automated. I don't even see the books. I don't even find out that the sale has happened until whichever platform you buy it through. I get the reports from whichever printer printed it.
And you just upload new covers or new information on the and they are directly implemented.
Yeah. So
super nice.
There's the interior, whether that's an ebook or print file or whatever, and then there's a cover, and you can update either or both, and you put it into the system, and it's usually for print. It usually takes a few days because you need to check that the proof has actually worked. Particularly if you're changing the interior file you need to make sure that you haven't bollocksed it up in some way so that, so you need to make sure it's actually printing correctly. So I usually do a print proof of that, check that it looks fine, and then approve it. So that might take up to a week.
All right.
But with the ebooks, it's instant.
So the printers, they are like all over the world, or is it shipped from Great Britain?
Okay. This gets complicated. Right. All of my books are up on Ingram Spark, which has printers all over the world. Okay. I also have my books up on KDP, which is Amazon's sort of self-publishing arm, and they also now do print as well, and they print locally as well. Right? They're sometimes even using, I think, the same facilities. I am in the process of setting things up so that people can buy print books from me directly, because I would make about 40% more per sale if people could do that. But it is not enough money for it to be worth me printing out books, packing them and shipping them myself, right? The hourly rate doesn't work out to anything worthwhile, right? And it's tedious. So that's currently, the issue is you have a website that is the sales platform. Let's take Amazon as a popular example, right? And you have the printers, let's say Ingram, okay? And they have to be integrated in a way that allows a sale that occurs on Amazon to send the instruction to print which particular book and to send it to which particular address, plus the chunk of the money that Amazon doesn't keep, right? And that integration is the issue, right? So now Shopify have created an integration with Lulu, which Lulu is good quality, but their print costs are astronomical. They're like 3 times as much as it costs to print the same book on Ingram or KDP. Okay. And there's also now a British company called Book Vault, which integrates with Shopify. So you can have a Shopify store, people can buy the paperback or hardback or whatever, and all that sending of instruction and stuff is handled by the system, right? And the thing is, Book Vault at the moment print in the UK only and ship out from there. And 80% of my market is in the US. But Book Vault they're trying to find a printer who can do the printing work for them in the US to the quality that they need at a price that will work for the Book Vault customers, like me. And they're also looking at cheaper shipping options. So if instead of sending an individual book to an individual in America, they'll send a shipment of books once a week, which then gets split up and sent out in America, and that is much cheaper. Because if you get it shipped from Britain to United States, it's going to cost you maybe $10, $12 in shipping. And people have been spoiled by Amazon's free shipping forever, and yeah, it's a problem. And of course, also, I have readers in Brazil and Singapore and Australia and wherever else. And so what we're working towards is getting a solution where perhaps Book Vault can print in other places and integrate with Shopify, or I might use Book Vault for UK orders and possibly Lulu for American orders, but I don't want to be paying that much money in print costs. So yeah, it's complicated. So self-publishing is a relatively new thing in terms of this sort of automated print-on-demand stuff. But actually, it's not. People have been self-publishing for years. Like Bertrand Russell's absolutely classic philosophy of mathematics. It's this gigantically important mathematical philosophy book that he wrote sometime early 20th century. Cambridge University Press didn't think that it would make any money, and so he paid to have it published, right? And then, of course, it went on to become this mega classic that every university student doing maths or philosophy had to buy. And, actually, a friend of my dad's a veterinary surgeon. A friend of my dad's wrote a book on diseases in pigs, which became the classic work. And, of course, he sent it round to various publishers, and they all went, nah, I'm not going to touch that, no. So he published it himself. And it became this classic, and every veterinary department in the world is teaching out of his Diseases of Pigs book when they're talking about pig diseases. And so these same publishers contacted him a year or two later saying, actually, can we publish your book now? And he told them to fuck off because he was making so much money. And that was like in the 60s, I think.
All right.
So
if I understood it correctly, the difference is now that you can start for very little money, like you don't have to pay big print runs, and the level of scale that you can get is quite astonishing because you can get it basically worldwide if you want to.
Yes, you can start for no money and you can get worldwide distribution. But a sensible person pays for an editor, and if they're not a professional graphic designer, they pay for a book cover.
Yeah, book covers are hard.
Yeah, and it's a specialist thing. And, I have a budget for, when I produce a book, I expect to pay maybe a couple of €1,000 to get it to the level I want it to be at. Something around there. It depends on the book and various other things, but something like that.
And I guess you expect to make this money back, right?
Yeah, and things I often run, if I don't run a crowdfunding campaign in the normal sense, like on Indiegogo, for instance, I often run effectively a crowdfunding campaign through my mailing list where I put up the current draft and so people can buy the current draft immediately and get sent a hardback when they're ready.
Yeah.
Right? So they get the basic book, which is going to be tinkered with and improved and edited a bit, but they get the basic information immediately, and they get a hardback when it arrives, and they know that they're actually supporting the work, which is important to some people, some very kind and nice and lovely people who I completely depend on. So yes, if you're listening, thank you very much. And so that basically, it usually raises enough money to pay for all of the expenses of producing the book the way I want to produce it. But even if it didn't, I'm likely to get the money back because my books tend to sell. Except not in August, apparently.
Yeah.
Not in August 2022.
So are the people who are supporting your crowdfunding campaign and did they get the draft, do you expect or do you hope to get some feedback back to improve the draft? Like, is this part of beta reading or something?
Okay, feedback is a tricky thing.
Yeah.
You absolutely have to get qualified feedback. But firstly, most people have no clue how to give feedback to a book, right? They'll say, oh, that was really nice, I really liked it. Or, no, I didn't like it very much. And that's it.
Yeah.
Right? Which is completely useless. You can't act on that. And also, fundamentally, the only opinions that matter are the opinions of people who actually buy the book, right? If you find it in your friend's house and flick through it and don't like it, I don't care, right? But if you buy it, I want to make sure that you like it, that it's exactly what you're looking for, right? And the only way to make sure, people will say they're going to buy it, who don't, and people who don't say they're going to buy it do, and there's no way to know who's going to buy it unless you actually sell it to them.
Yeah.
Right? And so what I've been doing with these pre-sales is it creates a list, if you like, of people who are sufficiently interested that they are definitely going to buy the book, so much so that they actually already have bought the book, right? So now I know that their opinion matters, right? And then I have either in the draft itself and or in an email or whatever that goes out, I have a link to a Google form where there is a list of questions that I want them to answer and a space for them to put, if they would like to be credited in the acknowledgements, they need to write whatever they want to be credited as in that space, right? So then I have a file. So when I'm doing the acknowledgements, when the book's about to be published, I just copy and paste those things in, and so the people who want to be acknowledged can be. And if 100 people buy the book in advance, maybe 20 will fill out the form.
Yeah.
And of those, maybe 12 will put a name in that field.
So I was on the side of not filling out the form once I bought the teaching. What's it called again? The full title?
Which one?
The one about how to teach European martial arts.
Oh, the course.
No, the book, like, what's it called?
I haven't written a book about how to teach historical martial arts yet. I'm in the process of doing so, but I haven't written it. I've got a course on how to teach.
I mean, the theory and practice of historical martial arts.
Oh, you were one of my beta readers for theory and practice, were you?
Yeah, I think I supported the crowdfunding campaign, and I would have had the opportunity to give feedback, but I never got around to it. And then at some point, just the email came to, it's finished. Thank you for your feedback. Like,
right, there you go. Because and I always put a date on it because I need it by a certain time because the book needs to get out into the world. Because what that does is, with that list of questions, it makes it easy for them to give actually useful feedback. So I ask questions like, what was your favorite bit? What was your least favorite bit? is there anything you think I should cut out? Is there anything you think I should add? Any other comments? Would you or one of the first ones is, would you recommend this to your friends?
Yeah.
Right. And then the bits about acknowledgements and put your name in and that sort of stuff. So that gives them a structure, and they're just simply answering the questions. It's much easier for them to do that than it is for them to actually give a useful critical feedback just with a blank email.
Yeah.
And that's where the stuff about, I need to expand my tournament section and make it a bit less cynical came from.
And you do this for every book, or is it just some of the books and some others?
Yeah, most books, I think, for the last 6 years or so. I think I did it for the first time for, it might have been Theory and Practice, actually. Honestly, I don't remember.
About how many books are we actually talking? How many books did you write?
Hang on. Like actually published books. 8, 9, 10, 11. I think we're at 12 at the moment. But it's oh no, I missed out 2. So 14.
14. In how many years?
My first one came out in 2004, and it took me 4 years to write. The second one came out in 2006, took me 2 years to write. Then I had kids in 2007 and 2008. So my next book came out in 2010. And that was Medieval Dagger. And then there's like one thing I did, for example, for Theory and Practice and for my From Medieval Manuscript to Modern Practice books. Both of those I wrote sort of discrete chunks. Like, for example, for Theory and Practice, I wrote The 7 Principles of Mastery, Choosing a Sword, Ethics, Breathing, a few other bits and pieces, which were published as separate standalone short books. Like Preparing for Free Play, for instance, is like 10,000 words on skill development. And those were published as shorts to get some money in, because it helps to feed the children. But also because it gets readers interested in giving me feedback so I can improve it for when it goes into the book that is. So the book Theory and Practice, about half of it has been previously published as these 7 discrete separate books. With From Medieval Manuscript to Modern Practice, it is the sections of Fiore's longsword material out of armour on foot. So sword in one hand, sword in two hands, sogar largo, sword in two hands, sogar strato. Oh, and there's a section of guards and blows. So I separated that out. So like mechanics, sword in one hand, sword in two hands, sogar largo, sword in two hands, sogar strato. So mechanics, largo, and sword in one hand were published as standalone ebooks, and then I added the strato stuff and a bunch of other stuff, and I published it together as a whole book. I find it helps to break stuff down into chunks, and if a book's going to take several years, it's actually really quite difficult, because when you publish a book and people go, "Oh, I do like your new book, guys," it's very nice, right? But it's difficult to keep going in isolation. But by publishing chunks of it, if they work as a standalone chunk, publish it as a separate thing and get feedback from that, it kind of just helps keep the process moving along until the book's ready. I don't do that with every book, but with some it seems to work.
And are you publishing every book as a hardcover or paperback and ebook, or either or both?
Generally, ebook, paperback, hardback. My workbooks are available as ebooks and as paperbacks. I think I probably ought to do a hardback version because it's easier to write on if it's a hardback book. But so that's my Rapier workbook series, which is, again, I produced it in 4 separate volumes and then I produced the combined volume. It's just easier that way. I've also got the first volume of my Ahmed Zari workbook series that's out, and they're both just paperbacks and ebooks.
And there are and the ebooks and the real books, are they the same amounts sold, or is one superior to the other?
Generally speaking, I make the most money by mile out of the paperbacks. Right? Hardbacks do sell, but not very much, and I sell most of those to the early adopters who buy the book before it comes out. And ebooks, I sell some. I don't even really track them because I don't really think of the ebooks as a proper product because I'm of the generation that predates ebooks by quite some time. And I've never been able to actually really read on an e-reader. It's just doesn't work to hold my attention. So to me, paper is the thing. But if you look at it from a sort of business perspective, if you have 3 products of 3 different prices, people will usually pick the middle one. And it just happens actually a while ago in January this year, I think I ran a series of Facebook ads I put the Medieval Longsword ebook up on my online course platform thing because it has all these various things that you can do and free stuff you can add in and what. And I ran Facebook ads to that, and it did okay. Quite a few people bought it. But the most common question I got was, is a paperback version available? To which I would happily reply, why, yes, it is. Right? Go to wherever and buy it. And yeah, that was actually, I think I sold more copies of the Medieval Longsword in paperback that month than any other month ever. Right? Just because the Facebook ads seem to work. I need to run some more Facebook ads, obviously, because if my August sales are anything to go by, I actually need to do some work to get people to actually go and buy my stuff.
I find it a bit curious that you don't consider the theory and practice of historical martial arts to be a book about teaching.
It has a section of teaching in it.
Yeah,
but it's not just about teaching. It's got about a third of the book is how to do the research. That's not teaching. That's research.
But I think it's something that instructors should know. It's not.
That's a whole other question.
Okay.
Teaching is its own separate skill, right?
So that's the differentiation. Because I looked at it as a book that instructors could and should probably read because there's a lot of stuff in it for them. So I kind of put it in the teaching corner.
Right. I mean, and I'm very glad that you think that because that's pretty much what I intended. But teaching, people can do research and not be able to teach, and people can teach and not be able to do research. They're two fundamentally different skills. And so the research section is there for people who want to do research, and hopefully that includes quite a lot of teachers. But it also has, as you know, it has sections on mechanics and skill development and breathing, and various other things. So, and it does have a section on how to teach a class, how to teach an individual lesson. And so basically my course that's coming out this month, How to Teach, is those 2 little chapters from Theory and Practice expanded out into basically an entire book length worth of material unto itself, because teaching is its own separate thing.
And will you write a book about teaching specifically as well, or is it just a course, just in...
At the moment, it's just a course. I set out to write a book, and it wasn't coming, and it wasn't coming, and it wasn't coming, and it didn't work, and I couldn't get it to work, and it just didn't bloody work. And then I thought, well, why don't I make it a course? And then it just wrote itself. So I was like, okay. So in my head, apparently they're 2 different things. And actually, given that this course is mostly audio, of course, I wrote everything out first, and then I read it carefully into the microphone, and then carefully edited it and all that lot in the studio, as I was mentioning earlier. So it is a book worth of material for sure.
Yeah.
But because I'm trying to communicate a skill, it has exercises and things in it. You're supposed to download class plans and fill them out in a certain way, and you're supposed to plan out a whole beginner's course and get an idea of your class plans. But having run the first class with your after action review section, you then use that to modify your plan for the next class. And one of the exercises is to see how your original beginner's course plan changed as it met the beginners.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, so I guess if you wrote it out beforehand, you could call it as an audiobook.
Yeah. But thing is, my audiobooks don't sell at all. I've produced 2 and nobody buys them. Right? I don't know why.
Okay.
But I paid a professional actor to narrate the Theory and Practice book, Kelly Costigan, and I have yet to sell enough. Since 2 years later, I have not yet sold enough copies of the audiobook of Theory and Practice to get the money back that I paid the narrator. Right?
Okay. Yes. Yeah. That's a shame.
Yeah. Well, you see, I think it will come. I think people are getting more and more used to consuming audio about various different things, and they just don't know to go and look for an audiobook about historical martial art, right? And so I think eventually it will take off. Like my George Silver audiobook. It sold not brilliantly, but okay in the crowdfunding campaign. And I've got the original pronunciation version with Ben Crystal, who is a world-class Shakespearean actor doing original pronunciation, sort of 16th century London accent, reading George Silver's book. It's absolutely brilliant. And Jonathan Hartman, who is a modern Shakespearean actor, doing the kind of modern pronunciation of George Silver's Paradox of Defense. It raised just enough money during the crowdfunding campaign to pay for the narrators.
Yeah.
Hasn't made me any money since. Right. So my months and months of work that went into that have not been paid for. But I don't care. It was a good idea, and I'm not sorry I did it. The thing is, if I produce this how to teach thing as an audiobook, it will make no money.
Yeah.
Right. And I need people, honestly, it'll make no money because no one will buy it. And if no one buys it, no one will hear it. And if no one hears it, the standard of teaching in historical martial arts worldwide is not going to go up. Or at least not. The reason I produce this is because it's really obvious to me that an awful lot of people are teaching historical martial arts because they're the person who happens to know the most in that particular room. And they don't necessarily particularly want to be teaching. Or if they do want to be teaching, they don't particularly know how to do it. So they're just doing their best. And it would make their lives an awful lot easier if they had a clear sort of process for actually acquiring the skill of teaching. So,
I think you're absolutely right on that. Also, you can find information out there, but it's bits and pieces here and there. But you have to put it together yourself. And if you have just one place where all the bits and pieces are already prearranged so that it fits for historical European martial arts, it should make life easier.
Exactly. And then eventually, when hopefully the course has made plenty of money and I can, feed my children and keep flying airplanes and whatnot, then I might produce a book to kind of go with it. Like my Windsor Method, the Principles of Solo Training, that book grew out of my solo training course.
Sorry, which book did you say?
The Windsor Method, the Principles of Solo Training. Basically, how do you train yourself to be good at the things you want to be good at?
Yeah. And so it was after the course was running for a while?
Yeah. I produced the course in 2019.
Yeah.
And then COVID hit in 2020. And so
more relevant than ever.
Yeah. And if you're stuck at home and you can't get to your sword club, you're going to go mad if you're a sword person. And so I thought this might help. And so I made it widely available by dropping the price by 95%. Right? So pretty much anybody could get it. Yeah. And if they couldn't afford the $20 I was asking for it, then they could email me and I'd let them in for free because, it was a shitty situation and it was something that might help. And it did help some people. I know people told me.
Did people take you up on offer? Like, did someone mail you?
Over 1,000 people.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. And a bunch of people contacted me to say, because I was offering it also for free, could they send me $100 or whatever to cover 5 free places?
Oh, really?
Oh, super nice.
That's great.
Yeah, that was super nice. And some blessed people actually just paid full price for the course as well, which was even better. Because of course, all my seminars teaching income disappeared in 2020. Right? Yeah. And it's a major part of my my business ecosystem is actually showing up and teaching in person. Actually, it's my favorite thing to do, and I would do it for free if I could afford not to charge for it. But none of that was happening in 2020. So. So the course was already there, and people were engaging with it, and contacting me about it, and so I produced the book in I think last year, 2021, because it's helpful. Basically, an online course is usually a bunch of videos or audio or whatever else, and you kind of go through it perhaps in whatever order you want, and it's difficult to get a clear picture of the overall kind of intellectual structure of it, right? Books are really good for that, right? They're linear and compact, and they're good for sort of taking this pattern out of your head and laying it down so that people can see it.
Yeah.
yeah, so I produced the book, and it's funny, the course did really well. And the book has hardly sold a single copy. There's no way to know. There is absolutely no way to know. Like, nearly 10 years after it was first published, Medieval Longsword had its best month ever. And in its year of publication, Windsor Method Principles of Seller Training did almost no business. I mean, it paid for itself. It paid for this, layout and cover design and whatnot. And,
that's pretty surprising. I would have really thought you had that process figured out because you're at it for so long and you have so much experience.
Right. But then you see, I don't write to market. I don't figure out what's going to sell and then write that. I figure out what I want to write next and write that. And my Vadi translation, the art of sword fighting in earnest, right? Which is just translation and commentary and introduction, all that sort of stuff. It's made no money. Because why would it? How many people actually want to read Vadi? Right? Lots of people want to swing swords around in a Vadi-like way, but they don't want to read the book, right? But I didn't write it because I expected it to make money. I wrote it because I wanted to understand Vadi, right? So it did what it was supposed to do. And it paid for its expenses, and it was part of my PhD and stuff, so it's had all sorts of other knock-on benefits. But the books that actually consistently make money are invariably books that make it easy for people to swing swords around.
Yeah, we kind of started out with the podcast, and now we have gone down this rabbit hole into the call it the Guy-verse, like a bit of a metaverse. Yeah, just with a lot of stuff, really.
You ask the questions, I'll answer them.
I'm perfectly happy to hear. It's just like it's impressive how much stuff you did over the years. And I mean, there are many points that we didn't even cover, like the card games and the involvement.
Oh God,
So maybe let's look in the future. You already mentioned that you're working on the course about teaching. Something else coming up?
Okay. The How to Teach course is the first phase of it is done. Like, it's ready to go out to the first cohort of students who will then tell me they need to have a section on this, or tell me that they didn't understand the section on that, and that will give me some, So these things, they tend to improve over time, but it's fundamentally done. The things coming after that, I have a couple in my head, but they're both in a very delicate stage where if I let them come out of my mouth, they're probably going to break. Mm-hmm. This is not me being cagey. It's not a sort of privacy thing or whatever. It's just when an idea begins, if it needs to kind of crystallize and become clear and robust before it's ready to be looked at outside the head. So I don't have a project that's coming next down the pipe that is sufficiently developed in the idea stage that I can say, yes, it's a book about this, or yes, it's a course about that. That hasn't happened yet. But yes, there'll be stuff coming, of course, because historical martial arts is huge. And I mean, one thing I would like to do, this is an idea. Jessica Finney was supposed to come over to the UK in June, and for various reasons that didn't happen. But I'm planning on doing at some point, if I can hold Jessica's feet to the fire, or I mean, maybe just to fly over to Kansas and go see her and we'll do it there. Fiore's wrestling stuff. I'm not a good enough wrestler to really teach that to wrestlers.
We're talking a course here, right?
Yeah, this would probably be a video course thing. That would be very cool.
Yeah.
To get Jessica and I, because I know the Fiore stuff inside out and backwards, and Jessica knows the wrestling stuff inside out and backwards, and together we can get a solid. This is how these techniques work. That's the easy bit. Then this is how we train to make these techniques work, and then this is how these techniques are applied in other situations. That sort of thing. That I would like to do with Jessica. I don't know. I'm also working pretty hard on my private pilot's license, which is taking up quite a lot of my thinking space.
Guy in the sky.
Guy in the sky.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, Guy, there's one question that you keep asking your guests, and I'd like to hear your take on it. I'm not going to phrase it like you did. Can you ask yourself your final question on the podcast?
Oh, okay. I think the question you mean is, what is the best idea you haven't acted on?
Exactly. Beautifully worded.
Okay. I have two. I've had one billion-dollar idea in my life. And I actually discussed it in my episode with Joe York. And it is the fundamental problem of collaboration in any kind of artistic project is splitting up the money, right? It's really hard.
Okay.
Because copyright persists for 75 years after your death or whatever. And if this thing, let's say the three of us wrote a book together and it gets published, then the publisher, which might be me, might be one of you, whatever, or somebody else, has to split up the money and give it to us and give it to our heirs for 70 odd years after we die, assuming that the book continues to sell. Right. And also, wouldn't it be nice if, let's say you're writing a book and you want professional help with the editing or whatever, wouldn't it be nice if you could say, give the editor their fee or a slightly reduced fee and a percentage of the proceeds, assuming the book makes money? I mean, think, the person who edited the first Harry Potter book made probably a couple of £1,000 for their editing work, and that's it.
Yeah.
Right? How frustrating is that? If they'd been given maybe 1% of the proceeds, they could retire, right?
That's true, yeah.
Retire to a pretty fancy big house too. So anyway, so what I would like, well, this idea that I haven't acted on because it is basically, it would require finding the right people, because it absolutely is not something you can build by yourself, is to build a service where creators can register a project with the service, register who owns what percentages of the project, and then all the money generated by the project goes through the service and is then distributed according to the percentages that the creators have agreed on.
That's a pretty good pitch, because then also as an editor, for example, you can take some risks. Like if you really like something and it sounds very promising, you can say, you know what, I'm doing a reduced rate, I believe in this project. And then you give it the extra effort.
Right. And of course, so this service would be funneling huge amounts of money if it does well. And of course, it will be taking its own percentage of that, maybe 2% or whatever, right? And providing the service so that more creative collaboration can happen.
Yeah, and then self-publishing is on the rise. There is a growing need to get in touch with editors and so on.
Yeah, so it's a fundamental good because it allows people to work together who otherwise maybe couldn't. And it's a fundamentally good business idea because it means basically getting control of a gigantic cash flow.
Yeah, I like it.
Right. It's
really
a brilliant
good idea.
But I like it. It's probably the only billion-dollar idea I've ever had. And the other one, I think it was Mila Andreevska who asked me this when I interviewed her for my show. And it was what would you do if you had like millions of euros to spend improving historical martial arts worldwide? And it was also the best idea I haven't acted on, which is a social media platform that you pay for, which will eliminate 99% of the shit, right? Because there would be no need for algorithms or any of that sort of stuff. And there'll be no advertising. It's all paid for. But it's a non-profit, paid-for service so that sword people can interact with each other in a safe and useful online space, right? Now, I have a Discord server that my online students use, and that is something a bit like that. But what I have in mind is much bigger. And like at the moment, most historical martial arts events, they just have a Facebook page. That is a shitty, awful situation because Facebook can pull that page at any time. They just can change their terms of service and all that stuff just disappears, right? And for various sensible reasons, quite a lot of the people who are on my mailing list, for instance, will not go to a Facebook link. They will not go to an event that they can only find on Facebook because they will not create a Facebook account to get into the website so that they can actually see this event.
And on the other hand, about 90% of the HEMA crowd is probably only still on Facebook because of the HEMA stuff.
Exactly. They've all shifted to Instagram and other places, right? So a historical martial arts specific, paid for, but non-profit social media thing so that, you can have mentoring programs, you can run events, you can do all the social media stuff that you normally do. You can post pictures of your cat if you want. But that's also where you'll find, like on my Discord at the moment, you might find, I don't know, Michael Chidester and Cornelius, blanking on his surname.
Berthold?
Yeah, exactly him. discussing some incredibly abstruse aspect of medieval manuscripts, right? And that no one is ever going to see that except the people who happen to be on my Discord, who happen to be on that section of it at that time, or happen to scroll back through it and find it, right? Because it's not really searchable, and it's fine. It gets people talking to each other, and that's a good thing. But it doesn't have the kind of the benefits that you get with a forum or
it's not an archive. You can find the old stuff. They talk about it and it's gone.
Yeah. So it would take a lot of money to set it up, to build it properly, but it should be, because of course you need apps and, like iOS app and various other apps and blah, blah, blah. It has to work on people's phones. It has to work the way people currently use social media now. But it would eliminate all of the nastiness that you get with kind of classic social media. So that's another idea I have not acted on, because I'm totally unqualified to act on it.
Interesting. I am running an HEMA event calendar for Germany, Austria, and Switzerland for that reason, so that people can get away from Facebook and the non-Facebook crowd, because the younger HEMAists are not on Facebook, because why would they join? Maybe Instagram or TikTok or whatever. So they were excluded from event not participation. There's usually some other way to get there, but they didn't know about it. Like, how could you figure it out if you were not on Facebook?
Yeah,
it on.
Yeah, sorry. Make sure you send me a link to put in the show notes.
Yeah, it's easy. It's HEMA.events.
Yeah, I wanted to say that.
That is easy.
Yeah.
It's HEMA.events.
Super straightforward.
that is a really good URL.
I was surprised that it was still free. Yeah.
That is and obviously, of course, if you claim the URL that's that general, you have to expand it to include the American events and the Australian events and the Singaporean events and the Indonesian events.
Well, it's not the site is not even a year old yet, and I could imagine expanding to other countries, but you have to get it working in one place, because if there's just one event in Poland and one in France, it doesn't work. But if really someone says, please do it for my country, we will support it, and we actually will go and use it, maybe that's a possibility.
That's a brilliant idea. So that's a really good idea that you have acted on.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well done. Brilliant. All right. Well, it's been great talking to you guys.
Thank you, too.
Run massively over time.
Yes, thank you very much for your time.
Yeah, that's that is the longest Schwertgeflüster episode we have done so far.
And it's probably going to be the longest Sword Guy episode too. So brilliant.
Halt, bitte noch nicht weglaufen. Ihr könnt diesen Podcast nämlich noch unterstützen. Wenn es euch gefällt, dann tut uns einen Gefallen, gebt uns ein Like auf Facebook oder bei Instagram oder bewertet diesen Podcast bei iTunes und unterstützt uns auch gerne auf patreon.com/Schwertgeflüster, Schwertgeflüster mit UE, und empfehlt diesen Podcast euren Freunden und Feinden weiter.